IVM.
Hi everybody, just wanted to ask everyone for a quick favor. We're running a brand survey right now and would really appreciate it if you could let us know what you think about the advertising on IVM. Go to ivmpodcast.com/survey and do let us know. As part of this, we'll be selecting 10 random participants and sending them some IVM swag, so do fill out those surveys.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast supported by Pragati, a flagship media initiative of the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like to bring fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and an Indian perspective to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to another episode of All Things Policy, where we discuss policy issues of importance and help you make sense of all the news that you read. My name is Priyal D. Almeida and I work with the research group at Takshashila Institution focusing on health and life sciences. The Takshashila Institution is an independent, non-partisan think tank and a school of public policy. We have education programs that are tailored specifically for people like you. Admissions are now open for a special course in ethical reasoning in public policy, where you learn to apply ethical reasoning to public policy questions. We'll use concepts, frameworks, and problem sets to examine and resolve ethical questions. Biobanks are supposed to become the norm as large-scale data sets have been appearing, and they are likely to drive the future of life science and healthcare research in India. However, there are multiple questions surrounding the ethics and consent processes, and they need to be addressed. In India specifically, there is no law that addresses these questions, and in the absence of these laws, multiple vulnerable sections of the society may be left open to abuse. Now, to discuss this, I have with me Dr. Shambhavi Naik, who is a research head at Takshashila Institution. Welcome, Shambhavi.
Thanks, Priyal. Hello, everyone.
So, hi. Before we begin, biobanks are basically repositories for human biological materials, and they are linked to the personal as well as the health information. And these biobanks, they prove to be valuable resources for researchers, as it allows them to extend and expand their understanding of human health as well as diseases. Now, these biobanks may not necessarily lead research projects by themselves, but they support the research by providing biological samples. And these samples are generally collected via voluntary donations or via post-mortem. So basically, what I wanted to ask you, Shambhavi, is that when we talk about biobanking, why is it exactly important?
Right. Thanks, Priyal. I think we started working on the aspects of biobanking a couple of years ago. I really have to thank Dr. Manjulika Vas at St. John's Research Institute for introducing me to the topic. Superficially, it just sounds that, hey, look, you have a repository of samples. This could be in a research institute. These could be commercial banks which are holding samples. And then most likely, this work, the samples are used for research purposes. The idea is that if you say, suppose you want to study a particular genetic mutation in cancer, you have a biobank which houses a lot of samples from patients that is suffering from that cancer. Then you can have access to a large amount of data set. You can get a lot of information out, something that has been enabled by a lot of technological progress in the past few decades in the field of life sciences. You can identify even tiny mutations that could be causing the disease. And so there is this increasing dependency on looking at large data sets to be able to create hypotheses around disease formation. And there is just one example of how you can use a biobank, right? And it makes complete sense that we use these large data sets to either find diagnostic markers, find biomarkers, or even find therapeutics against a particular disease. And so superficially speaking, they sound great. And they are becoming more and more important every day because of all the technological progress that has led us, or rather enabled us to now analyze bigger data sets, to process a lot of samples. And there's an increasing shift on the idea that we need to look at larger data sets. And therefore, we have got biobanking creeping up. Even during the time of COVID, I think the first thing that the government of India also announced was a COVID registry. and the idea that we should collect samples and we should analyze samples to be able to characterize the disease. So this seems to be the way of future research, right? And even for commercial purposes, is to create biobanks. But they're not that simple also, because like you rightly said, they house a lot of personal information, and the amount of data that you can gather from a single piece of tissue is humongous. And we don't even know where it ends, because again, over time, we have been coming up with better and better techniques to say, understand what our genome can tell us about physical characteristics, about mental characteristics. And so there is an unlimited sort of potential to the human tissue sample that you can store in a biorepository. The other is obviously you also have health data. You might take medical history. You can have personal data that is attached to that tissue sample. That doesn't happen in all cases, but someone might have that data. So there's a lot of concerns around data confidentiality. There are concerns around ethics of using these samples. And that makes biobanking a very interesting piece. It's very important for the future of research in healthcare in India, but it's also pivotal that we kind of have the correct set of regulations around it, so that people's data is not abused, people are not mistreated, because you can really get a lot of benefit when you're looking at a huge spread of genetic information, particularly in a country like India where we have so many genetic populations, right? So we are sitting on a treasure trove of data that leaves us amenable to mistreatment if biobanking is not properly regulated. I first came into contact with this when Dr. Vaz had held a discussion group at SJRI, and we went through some of the aspects of biobanks. And the primary thing that I think kind of got us all started was the fact that India doesn't really have a definition of a biobank. So if you think about it from the point of view of a biorepository, then any diagnostic company that you go to, you give a blood sample for a glucose test, for example, could be a biobank. Any research institute, any academic institute which does studies on patient samples could be a biobank. And then you obviously have commercial biobanks. You could have people who hold cord blood cells, they could be biobanks. So there's a lot of ambiguity in the field. And I think that is what we are now trying to address. I think one of the reasons why that ambiguity exists is because even in India, we don't have like a proper definition and a proper law or guideline, like an overarching guideline on what is biobanking and how do we regulate it. We have different sets of guidelines, and I can discuss what are the various aspects that these control. Priya?
Yeah, right. So, given the amount of data that the biobanking or the samples end up providing and the potential of what can be done using these samples, what are the current regulations that are present for biobanking in India, given that up until now, biobanking was not exactly defined properly, right? So now that there is a little more information about it, what are the current regulations that are in place in India?
Right, so we have piece by piece regulations, right? We have the ICMR's National Ethical Guidelines for Biomedical and Health Research Involving Human Participants, 2017.
Right.
And that one defines the biobank as an organized collection of human biological materials with usually associated data sets stored for years in appropriate facilities for research and potential commercial purposes with inbuilt policies for transparency. And those kind of lay out how can biospecimens be stored, what should be the confidentiality guidelines, how should privacy of donors be maintained. It recognizes there are ethical issues, and it lists that there are consent differences in biobanking. Apart from that, we have specifically for stem cell research, we have the ICMR DBT National Guidelines for Stem Cell Research 2017, which lays out guidelines for clinical research and product development using stem cells. We have the more recent National Guidelines for Gene Therapy Product Development and Clinical Trials. That's for gene therapy products. Then we also have the Indian Society of Assisted Reproductions guidelines that establish.
Yeah, basically, I think they set up the current guidelines currently for to provide clinical recommendations, basically to improve the healthcare within human reproduction and embryology, right? As well as also, I think ICMR was first developed the national guidelines for accreditation, supervision, and regulation to regulate the art clinics back in 2005. And then it was transformed into the art regulation bill in 2017. And both of which are currently waiting the passing in the parliament.
So that's the art bill and the surrogacy bill of 2016.
Yeah.
That happened in the past. So we have a lot of guidelines which kind of look at aspects of various biobanking related policy. We had the the Anthropological Survey of India drafted a bill to create a national repository for human genetic materials and frame rules for such a repository back in 2006, 2007, but that was also never passed. So we don't have a law per se. We do have like a bit of legal concourse in terms of the Transplantation of Human Organs and Tissues Act 2014, which
Yeah.
addresses preservation of human organs and tissues. But apart from that, we don't really have like extremely clear laws on biobanking, and neither do we have the data protection law yet, which kind of guarantees privacy and confidentiality
No.
to the donor, right? So those two things are kind of missing in
Right.
action. And I think that's something that we need to discuss because, as we said, there are a lot of issues when it comes to biobanking, and we will discuss those issues just post these messages from IBM.
Intel vPro provides the complete manageability tools to detect, repair, and protect your devices remotely, so your workforce can keep doing what they do best, wherever they're working from. Today, as most employees and IT teams no longer work under the same roof, fixing glitchy PCs and proactively managing the PC fleet has become increasingly difficult. The Intel vPro platform addresses these problems with its Intel Active Management technology, Intel AMT. vPro enables IT to keep mission-critical resources running by establishing a secure connection between IT and an Intel vPro platform-based PC. In the event of a cyber attack, Intel AMT lets IT remotely manage and repair systems simultaneously, even if they are dispersed across multiple locations. PCs can be recovered quickly wherever they may be. Plus, the Intel Endpoint Management Assistant, Intel EMA, enables cloud-based manageability using simple web-based tools to connect with and remediate any Intel vPro platform-based PC. Both these tools provide better manageability and faster response times, resulting in substantial device management support costs saving and fewer help desk tickets. Visit intel.in/IT heroes to know more. Intel vPro, built for business.
Hi, and welcome back to this episode on biobanking.
Hi. So, to continue with the conversation that we have been having right now, we understand that there is no definitive act or policy on biobanking yet in India. And there are no specified, but we have bits and pieces of various regulations that have been developed throughout the years. When we talk about biobanking and regulations, why exactly do we need like regulations, and what are the aspects that we need to focus on when we are trying to come up with biobanking based regulations for India specifically?
Right. So I think a few core aspects. The first of which is ethics, and I think this goes back to your initial announcement of the ethical reasoning course as well. Is that
Yeah, correct.
a lot of what we do in the life sciences is driven by ethics, and biobanking is no different. I think one interesting example that recently popped up was this idea that there is a Chinese company that is working with the PLA, and we don't know the veracity of these reports, but it was reported that this company offers prenatal tests, genetic screening tests. And the data that was being obtained was they were taking consent from people who were taking these tests to use the data for research. And research is a very broad sort of term. And so they were taking the consent to do research, and then there's speculation that the PLA was actually using this research for looking at stuff like super soldiers, etc. And now this sounds a little far-fetched, but in theory, under current terms and laws and guidelines, this is fairly acceptable. So I can give a sample to get a panel of genetic mutations tested. And the company might be doing some sort of research, which could be good or bad, ethical or unethical. And they might just ask me for consent to do research. And they would say that, hey, we'll anonymize your sample. So the researcher doesn't know who you are not identifiable at all. And therefore, can I have your permission?
Right.
And I, in good faith, might just believe that, hey, look, yeah, it makes sense. Someone's doing research. It might be for a disease. Why not? I have no use of that sample. It has left my body already. And I might have, without fully knowing the implications of what the research is on, how the sample will be used, etc. And this gets particularly exacerbated when you're looking at populations which are not very well informed about the types of research that can be done, who might not understand the consent form very well, who might be compensated in a manner for giving a sample and might feel that compensation justifies handing over their sample, right? And that is particularly true in the Indian context as well, where, again, because of our wide genetic diversity, we are a very lucrative sort of population to study. At the same time, we have socioeconomic groups which are poor enough, who might not be fully capable of understanding what is happening,
Yes.
and who might just blindly trust people, right? So we have this blind trust in our doctors as well, that if the doctor says something is good, it is good for us. And so we should do it. And that can actually lead to a lot of population being left vulnerable to just donating their samples without fully understanding their own rights or
Yeah.
without understanding consent.
Yeah. Also, because I think with respect to like our country, because we come from like low income countries, right? Middle this thing. So
Middle
high
to low
income
income.
countries, when they come, there is a chance of exploiting the people of this country for the genetic resources that is available here.
Right. So, and we have got examples of this happening. There was this community in Chhattisgarh that were told that they will be given free medicines and medical checkup if they donated blood, and consent forms were not signed. We recently had issues with the Covaxin trial in
Yeah.
Bhopal,
Yeah.
where it is not quite well understood on whether they were told that the vaccine was under trial or not, etc.
Yes.
So these issues do keep on cropping up, and therefore it is necessary that we have a stern sort of resort to legal help if required to
Yes.
make sure that vulnerable people are not exploited. And again, this is not an India specific phenomena either. It has happened elsewhere in the world as well.
Mm.
But in our context, it is very important that India kind of sets up a law that can help streamline these processes.
Correct. Yeah. And another aspect I think is also with respect to the consent models, like what kind of consent should we have when it comes to like biobanking? Because biobanking research is something like you give your sample, but at the time of giving a sample, the study may not be determined. So with that respect, figuring out what sort of consent models we need to go for in biobanking is extremely important, right?
Right. So there's always a trade-off. So when you're giving a sample, particularly to a biobank, which at that point of now time has not specified a study that they want to do, but they just say, hey, we want to keep your sample and then we will study it for something later. That sort of broad consents are also acceptable. You really don't know what research they're going to do on it. The trade-off there is obviously, do you want the biobank to get in touch with you every time they're going to use your sample, because that will be multiple times. So it adds burden for both the biobank and for you to consent.
Yes. Yeah.
But obviously that's really your definition of informed consent, is when they tell you that your sample is going to be used for this specific research project. And it's important because, I mean, for example, there's so many concerns around using gene editing in babies, for example, right?
Yeah.
And people have strong opinions of not allowing germline gene editing from happening. And if I am such a person and I have donated a sample for research, and then someone tells me, hey, we are going to use your sample for germline gene editing research work, I want to say no, right?
Yeah.
I because when I was giving the samples, I hadn't thought about what kind of research you're going to do. You weren't sure what kind of research you were going to do. But if you are doing something that I personally, and I could have a number of reasons why I might say no to that point of research, right? It is not up to you to figure out whether I'm correct or wrong. It is my sample. So I should have the right to say that I don't want my sample to be used in this sort of work. And that should be my right. So, and then if that adds a little bit of burden on to both you and me, that's fine, because that's the whole idea of informed consent and of trust. Because if I cannot trust what you're going to use my sample for, you are disincentivizing me from actually giving samples to you.
Yeah. Another aspect of like needing the regulations is also we need to touch upon, I think, is the sharing of the benefit. Exactly, like with respect to if a donor gives a sample, what kind of benefit are we talking about? Like, should the benefit come directly to the donors, or if not, if it goes directly to the public, what does the donor get out of this? I think this is also something that we need to touch upon with respect to regulations, right?
Right. And this is a very interesting area. I think it's also a bit controversial, and consensus is definitely difficult to reach. Our clearest case of why this is important comes from the story of Henrietta Lacks, who was an African American woman uh, who developed cancer. And at that point of time, researchers were trying very hard to develop cancer cells in petri dishes, and so that they could do better research, they could find diagnostic markers and therapeutics. It basically opens up a lot of areas of research for us if we can just grow the cancer cell in a petri dish instead of having to do study on humans, or like short-term studies using cancer cells. And Henrietta Lacks was one of the first people whose cancer cells actually grew inhibited, which has, I think, the most commonly used cancer cell line. And not just cancer now, I think that cells are used across the world, across a number of research fields. And the tragedy of the story is the fact that she never consented to anyone taking her samples. The researchers never went back to her or her family. She actually died of her cancer without receiving any benefit, not just from the research, but any monitoring benefit. And a number of therapies, a number of diagnostics using her cells with kind of no compensation to her or her family. And obviously that changed over time, over decades. The family had to fight out for their rights and for her rights. And that kind of showed that there was one problem with the consent bit, obviously. But
Yeah.
B, it's also important that if you are benefiting out of using somebody's material, then they should also get some benefits out of it. And it doesn't have to be purely direct benefits in terms of money, but it could be in terms of treatment. It could be in terms of you introduce new technologies in the market at cheaper rates. And this comes from work that Manjulika has done, where you share results with the participants, you bring in more transparency, you encourage further research. So, right. So
Right.
all of that is possible. So there are various mechanisms by which you can introduce benefit sharing, but that needs a very broad conversation and public dialogue from the government and people involved in biobanking.
Yeah, because there was one of the things during this entire discussion, while the entire conversation of biobanking was happening in general, was that altruism needs to be expected from people and all of that. But when you think about poor people, is it right of us to expect altruism from them when their health needs are so high, when their economic condition is so bad, right? So those also need to be taken into consideration when we have these conversations of benefit sharing.
Right. And that brings us back to the point that, hey, look, we need more public consultations on governance of biobanking than we currently are having. And it remains a very, very important topic. And this is the correct time for us to be discussing biobanking and coming up with a law, because it just creates opportunities for us to ensure that people are safe, that research is promoted, and that we get better data that will help spur on better therapeutics, better diagnostics as we try in the future. I mean, it's all for benefit of Indian citizens. And a little policy clarification might actually go a long way in promoting a lot of the research around biobanking.
Yeah. So before we continue this conversation on why India needs biobanking regulations, we will come back with a short break.
Hey everybody, it's been another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. On the Life Manifesto with Zarina Poonawalla, we learn about the 7 golden rules of personal branding and how you can apply these in your daily life. Do check out this kickoff episode for Season 3. On Paisa Vaisa, Anupam speaks to Sumit Rai, Managing Director and CEO at Edelweiss Tokyo Life Insurance. They discuss current trends in the insurance industry. In the world of Simplified, Chuck Naren and Tony are celebrating Engineers Day. They share fun college anecdotes, talk about engineering education in India and its future. On Advertising is Dead, Varun talks to Vikas Gupta, Managing Director of Wiley, about how Wiley made the shift from traditional publishing to edutech. And on Echoes of India with Anirudh Kanisetti, tune in to discover why history forgot the Ajivikas and remembered the Mauryas. Do follow us on social media. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, if you're enjoying this show or any of our other shows for that matter, please do tell a friend. That is the most helpful thing that you could do to help us out. And finally, this week, we'd like to thank our sponsors on the network, Cred, Bank of Baroda, Quarter, CoinSwitch, Kuber, and Intel vPro. We really do appreciate the support. This is what makes it possible.
Hi, and welcome back to the conversation that we are having regarding biobanking policies for India. We were conversing about why we need regulations for biobanking, and we were discussing about the ethical concerns and the consent mechanisms and benefit sharing. And continuing with that, one another aspect of biobanking is also, and a very important aspect of it, is confidentiality of data. And with respect to biobanking or with respect to collection of samples, how do you identify the samples? What is the issues associated, as well as how do we attain this data confidentiality? Something that we need to discuss. So, could you tell us more about it, Shobhi?
Right. So, like we said in the beginning, India doesn't really have a data protection law at the moment. It's been debated for a few years, and just have to wait and see what happens with that. The NDHM, the National Data Health Management Authority, has come out with a set of guidelines for health data. But the thing is that health data is very different from the other forms of personal data that you have. And particularly when you think about it in terms of a biobank, right, where you can access, if you have a tissue, you can access somebody's entire genome, which gives a lot of information not only about them, but like their immediate family members. And suppose even if you remove names, etc., and you're doing, say, you're doing research on a certain health parameter such as hypertension, right? So you'll have
Yeah.
some bits of health information about this person. You
Right.
might know their gender. Even if you don't, you could possibly make out their gender from looking at their genetic data. Then you have their genetic data as a whole. You might know where that sample came from because that might be important for your study. You might know something about their diet because you have collected that information as part of your study. Individually, all of these data points might not be enough to identify a person, but taken together, they might actually provide clues to who the person is, particularly when you're looking at a local biobank and a local research institute working together, right? And that's where issues with data confidentiality as pertaining to health data start of creeping in. And again, not just identify that person, but you might be able to say that, hey, look, this genetic trait seems to be heritable, which means that your sibling might also have similar diseases. So then it becomes extremely complicated. And that is why confidentiality is critical when it comes to biobanking, and we need better mechanisms than just saying that he will anonymize samples and keep them. Sometimes anonymization doesn't even work. Sometimes you might find this is very contested. You might find, say, a cancer biomarker when you are studying a person's data, and tell them, do not tell them. There are those kind of concerns as well. And so if you want to tell them, can you re-identify somebody based on their anonymized data? There are a lot of questions around these aspects when it comes to biobanking that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, correct. So with all of these, like, given that we know a little bit about what exactly the biobanking should entail, what the regulations need to be. So if we were to draw a biobanking law for India, what should that look like and what should it contain?
Yeah, I think it should address a lot of these points that we spoke about, right? And it is very difficult to create that law without thorough public consent and an understanding of what biobanking means and a clear vision for why it is important for India. And then it has to address these concerns of consent, I think, is primary, data confidentiality, and the ethical aspects. I think overall, in terms of our life and life science policies, we have not done this very well, is to do research on how people perceive ethics of a certain process. Our ethical guidelines are usually limited to procedural guidelines where we say that, oh, you have to take consent. But whether the actual study is ethical or not is something we kind of do not really allude to in our ethical guidelines. So that's something that we really need to change. And perhaps biobanking is a good place to start for that.
Right. Yeah. With this, I think this is coming to an end of the podcast. Thank you, Shambhavi, for having this great discussion with me. This was Shambhavi from Takshashila and Priyan signing off.
Thank you, guys. Keep listening to more episodes of All Things Policy.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.
Working Monday to Friday glued to your chair making you feel dull? Worry not. Get your 5-minute weekly dose of travel around the world with Postcards from Nowhere. Join me every Thursday as I explore the strange, obscure, and fascinating parts of the world and bring out facets of travel you may not have thought of before. You can find us on the IVM Podcast app, website, or wherever you get your podcast from.
Do you like true crime stories? Do you like to learn about the people behind some horrible, awful crimes? More specifically, women that may have committed these crimes. Actually, Indian criminals that are women? Then we'd like to welcome you to our podcast, Misconduct. My name is Raghavi.
And I am Nisha. We cover themes like murder, dacoity, drug trafficking, financial fraud, kidnapping, and many more.
You can catch us every Wednesday on the IVM Podcast Network or wherever you get your podcast.